The night was unusually quiet on the remote military base nestled deep within a desert valley. The harsh glow of floodlights cast long shadows on the concrete walls, creating an eerie stillness that seemed to stretch into infinity. Most soldiers were in their bunks, the rhythmic sounds of radios and distant footsteps filling the air as the base ran its usual night watch routines. But in a small, poorly lit corner near the communications bunker, something had shattered that calm, threatening to unravel the delicate order that held the base together. Corporal James Miller never expected to witness violence inside the base walls. He had joined the military with hopes of honor and discipline, convinced that the chain of command would protect everyone under its umbrella. Yet, as he stood frozen with a group of other soldiers, his eyes wide with disbelief, the scene unfolding before him contradicted every ideal he held. It started with a heated argument, barely audible over the steady hum of machinery and night insects. A man and a woman, both in uniform, were locked in a tense confrontation. Their voices rose and fell like a storm building momentum, drawing the attention of anyone nearby. Corporal Miller had seen disagreements before, disputes over schedules, mission priorities, or minor protocol violations, but this felt different. There was a sharp edge, a crackling tension in the air that made his skin crawl. Suddenly, without warning, the man's fist swung hard and fast. It connected with the woman's head in a sickening strike. The slap echoed against the walls, a harsh sound that cut through the silence like a gunshot. The woman stumbled backward, her hand flying to her temple, where a sharp trickle of blood welled up between her fingers. Her eyes, wide with shock and pain, locked briefly with the man's cold, unreadable gaze before she collapsed into a nearby chair. The crowd gasped. For a moment, no one moved, as if the entire base had frozen in disbelief. Soldiers exchanged looks of confusion and horror. How could something like this happen here, in a place designed for discipline and control? It was an assault on more than just a person. It was a violation of the military's most sacred code. Sergeant Linda Harper was the first to snap back into action. Known for her steely nerves and quick thinking, she pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside the injured woman. "Stay with me," she urged gently, pressing a handkerchief to the wound. The woman winced but didn't respond. Blood stained the fabric, stark against the pale skin. Nearby, the man stood motionless, his face blank. Some in the crowd whispered that he had been under stress, but no one could excuse what they had just seen. Murmurs began circulating. Was this a personal dispute? Was it linked to something bigger? The uncertainty fed the growing unease. Security now. Sergeant Harper called into her radio, her voice firm but controlled. "We've got a violent incident in Sector Charlie. All personnel stay alert." Within seconds, the sound of boots pounding on gravel grew louder as military police arrived on the scene. Two officers quickly moved to restrain the man, who offered no resistance but made no attempt to explain. The injured woman was carefully lifted and carried toward the medical bay, the urgency in the medic's pace underscoring the seriousness of the injury. Corporal Miller watched, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen combat zones where violence was expected, even routine. But inside the base, their home away from the chaos of the outside world, this felt like a betrayal. Soldiers trusted each other implicitly. They depended on discipline to keep everyone safe. If violence could break out here, what did it mean for their mission? As the initial shock faded, whispers multiplied. "Did you see who it was? What triggered it? Is she going to be okay?" The questions hung heavy in the humid night air, unanswered and growing louder. Captain Marcus Bennett, the base's operations officer, arrived briskly, his face tight with concern. He surveyed the scene quickly, then ordered all personnel back to their posts. "This is a serious breach of conduct," he said sternly, eyes scanning the crowd. "I want statements from everyone who witnessed this." No one leaves this area until cleared. His words, though calm, carried the weight of authority. The soldiers dispersed, some reluctantly, others with nervous urgency. Meanwhile, Captain Bennett radioed the base commander, a move that would set in motion events no one could have anticipated. The injured woman, identified as Lieutenant Sarah Collins, was rushed into the small infirmary. Dr. Allen, the base medic, examined her head wound carefully. "It's a nasty blow, but she's stable for now," he reported quietly. "We'll keep her under observation, run scans to rule out concussion or internal injury." Lieutenant Collins lay on the cot, her face pale and sweat dampening her brow. Despite the pain, she tried to maintain her composure, understanding the scrutiny her condition would bring. In the military, weakness was often seen as vulnerability, something to be hidden, but this was beyond control. Meanwhile, Captain Bennett gathered the senior officers in the command center. The gravity of the situation was clear. This was not a simple disciplinary matter. Assaults within the base could threaten morale and security, potentially exposing cracks in the chain of command that enemies could exploit. "We're dealing with more than just an isolated incident," Bennett said grimly. "There's something under the surface here. Tension, stress, unresolved issues. We need to get to the bottom of it, fast." His words echoed a deeper truth. The base had been under pressure for months. Long shifts, intense missions, and the constant threat of attack had frayed nerves. But no one had expected this to boil over into violence. Back outside, the man who struck Lieutenant Collins was being escorted to a holding cell. Private First Class Ryan Matthews was known to some as a quiet, if occasionally irritable soldier. No one expected him to lash out violently, but his recent behavior had been increasingly erratic. Those closest to him whispered about sleepless nights and whispered arguments with superiors, but nothing concrete had come to light. As Matthews sat alone in the cell, the reality of his actions settled heavily on him. What had driven him to this moment? Was it anger? Fear? Something darker? His mind raced, grappling with guilt and confusion. Across the base, soldiers struggled to make sense of the incident. Some avoided the spot where it happened, unwilling to confront the raw memory. Others talked in hushed tones, sharing theories and speculation. One thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The incident, brief as it was, had torn through the calm like a storm. And as the first rays of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the base braced itself for what was coming next. The arrival of the generals, the decision to shut down the base, was still hours away, but the ripple effects had already begun. In the quiet aftermath, Corporal Miller stood at the edge of the bunker, watching as shadows lengthened and the base slowly came alive with the murmurs of a community shaken. He couldn't shake the feeling that this night marked a turning point, a fracture in the foundation of trust and order that had kept them safe. He thought of Lieutenant Collins, bruised and vulnerable, and the man who struck her, now isolated and silent. Two people caught in a moment that had spiraled far beyond their control, dragging an entire base into uncertainty. As the desert wind stirred the dust around him, Corporal Miller silently vowed to watch closely, to listen carefully, because he knew that the real story was only just beginning. The night of the assault stretched endlessly for the soldiers and officers at the base. Though the physical violence had lasted mere seconds, its shock waves rippled through the community, unsettling every corner and stirring tensions that had long been simmering beneath the surface. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Lieutenant Sarah Collins, though stabilized, was still in the infirmary, her head wrapped in a makeshift bandage soaked with antiseptic. Her usually sharp blue eyes were clouded with pain and confusion as she struggled to come to terms with what had happened. She was a respected officer, known for her competence and calm under pressure, and yet now, here she was, vulnerable and hurt, a stark reminder that even the strongest could break. Sergeant Linda Harper, who had been first on the scene, stayed close by her side, a constant presence of support. "You're going to be okay, Lieutenant," she said softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling around them. "We're going to get through this. You're not alone." But Collins shook her head weakly. "I never imagined this would happen here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Inside the base, with people I trusted." Meanwhile, outside the infirmary, the base had descended into controlled chaos. Captain Marcus Bennett moved swiftly, coordinating with his team and issuing orders to maintain order and prevent panic. Every soldier was accounted for, but uncertainty lingered like a heavy fog. The man who had struck Collins, Private First Class Ryan Matthews, was confined in a small holding cell, isolated from the rest of the base. He sat on the hard bench, his head bowed, grappling with the consequences of his actions. His silence was thick and impenetrable, leaving officers to wonder what drove a disciplined soldier to such violence. An investigation team was mobilized immediately, with military police officers tasked to gather statements and piece together the events leading to the incident. Witnesses were called one by one, each recounting their version of the confrontation in nervous, fragmented accounts. Corporal James Miller was among them. He recalled the rising tension between Matthews and Collins, but had never expected it to erupt into physical violence. There were arguments, sure, Miller told investigators, but no one thought it would come to this. It was sudden, like a switch flipped. Other soldiers described the man as increasingly withdrawn, his behavior erratic in recent weeks. Some mentioned late-night arguments with superiors. Others whispered about personal problems Matthews might be hiding. No one had connected the dots until now. Amidst the investigation, rumors spread like wildfire. Stories ranged from accusations of harassment to suggestions of a cover-up. Soldiers speculated in hushed tones, some fearful of what the truth might reveal. A fragile trust within the base began to crack. The command center buzzed with activity as officers sifted through reports and testimonies. Captain Bennett worked tirelessly, coordinating with legal advisors and military intelligence. "We need to get ahead of this," he said grimly. "If we don't handle it properly, this could spiral into a full-scale crisis." Higher up, the base commander was briefed and quickly realized the gravity of the situation. This incident, though seemingly isolated, exposed deep-seated issues, stress, morale problems, possible leadership failures that threatened the entire mission. At the same time, the emotional toll on the personnel was mounting. Soldiers struggled to focus on their duties amid the turmoil. Some expressed anger, others confusion. Families of those stationed at the base anxiously awaited updates, their fears fueled by scant information and growing speculation. In the mess hall, conversations were tense and subdued. Private Jenkins, usually jovial, sat silently, staring at his food. "This isn't just about what happened to Sarah," he murmured to a fellow soldier. "It's about everything we've been bottling up, the pressure, the isolation. It's like we're all walking on a powder keg." Outside, a few soldiers gathered near the fence, looking out over the empty desert, searching for answers in the vast, silent landscape. The incident had cast a long shadow, and no one knew when, or if, it would lift. Back in the infirmary, Lieutenant Collins received visitors, fellow officers, friends, and medical staff offering support. Yet, despite the sympathy, a sense of isolation clung to her. She was not just healing from a physical wound, but also grappling with the betrayal of safety and trust. That night, as she lay awake in the dim light, her thoughts raced. How could someone she had worked alongside, shared missions with, turn violent? What had she missed? Questions haunted her, unanswered and painful. Meanwhile, the generals were already en route to the base, summoned by the gravity of the situation. Their arrival promised decisive action, but also uncertainty for everyone involved. As the hours ticked by, the base held its breath, caught between fear and hope. The incident had cracked open a door to hidden tensions, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about loyalty, discipline, and the human cost of military life. In the quiet moments between chaos, Corporal Miller found himself reflecting on the fragility of order. He understood now that beneath the surface of routine and regulation, real struggles were unfolding, struggles that could no longer be ignored. The night's violence was only the beginning. What came next would test the strength, resilience, and integrity of the entire base. The first rays of dawn had just begun to spill over the horizon, casting long golden beams across the desert terrain surrounding the base. Yet inside the command center, the air was thick with tension, the weight of the previous night's events still heavy on every soldier's mind. The atmosphere was far from calm. Word had spread rapidly that 3 high-ranking generals were on their way. Their arrival was not just a routine visit. It was an extraordinary measure that sent a clear message. This incident was far more serious than anyone had anticipated. As the general's convoy rolled onto the base, dust kicked up in swirling clouds, soldiers lined the perimeter, watching with a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and apprehension. These men represented the highest level of military authority, the kind of power that could change lives with a single command. General Robert Hastings, the base commander's direct superior, stepped out of the lead vehicle. Tall and imposing, with a voice that carried unmistakable authority, he wasted no time assessing the situation. Beside him stood General Diane Matthews. Known for her no-nonsense approach and razor-sharp strategic mind, and General Thomas Delgado, a seasoned veteran whose reputation for fairness was respected throughout the ranks. They moved quickly through the base, their eyes missing nothing. Soldiers instinctively straightened, the weight of their presence demanding respect. The generals didn't speak much. Their expressions alone conveyed the gravity of the moment. Inside the command center, General Hastings took charge immediately. "Report," he barked, his gaze locking on to Captain Bennett. Bennett's voice was steady, but carried the strain of sleepless hours. "Sir, last night, Private Matthews assaulted Lieutenant Collins. The incident was contained quickly, but it has revealed deeper issues within the base's morale and discipline. We've initiated an investigation and are working to maintain order." General Matthews frowned slightly. This kind of behavior is unacceptable at any time, let alone within the walls of a military installation. We must understand the root causes. What led to such a breakdown? Captain Bennett sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. There have been tensions, stress from ongoing missions, fatigue, and some internal disagreements. But we're still piecing together the full picture. General Delgado leaned forward. "We can't afford to let this escalate. I want immediate measures to secure the base and reassure the personnel." The generals wasted no time calling an emergency meeting with all senior officers. The room was filled with a charged energy, the usual decorum replaced by urgency and unspoken fear. The commanders understood that this incident threatened to undermine everything the base stood for. General Hastings addressed the group. "This assault is not just a breach of discipline. It's a symptom of a deeper problem. We need full transparency. I expect complete cooperation from every unit." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Furthermore, effective immediately, the base will be temporarily shut down. No personnel will enter or exit without authorization. This is necessary to conduct a thorough investigation and restore order." A stunned silence followed. The base shutdown was unprecedented, an action reserved for only the most critical crisis. Lieutenant Collins, still recovering in the infirmary, heard the news through whispered conversations. The thought of the base closing its gates sent a ripple of mixed emotions through her. Relief that the situation was being taken seriously, but also fear for what it meant for her and her colleagues. Outside, soldiers processed the news with varying reactions. Some nodded in understanding, accepting the decision as necessary. Others murmured discontent, frustrated by the sudden halt to their routines and the uncertainty that lay ahead. Corporal Miller felt a pang of anxiety. He knew that the shutdown wasn't just about containment. It was a signal that the military leadership recognized the fragility beneath the surface, and they were prepared to take drastic steps. The generals moved swiftly to implement new security protocols. Checkpoints were established, patrols increased, and communication lines tightened. Every corner of the base was scrutinized for potential risks. Meanwhile, investigators intensified their efforts. Military police conducted interviews around the clock, searching for clues that could shed light on Matthew's motives and the tensions within the ranks. The investigation was delicate. Accusations had to be handled carefully to prevent further division. In the mess hall, soldiers gathered in small groups, voices low but urgent. The story of the assault and the base closure spread like wildfire, sparking heated debates. Some defended Matthews, claiming the pressures of service had pushed him too far. Others condemned his actions unequivocally, fearing what unchecked violence could mean for the unit's cohesion. Private Jenkins, standing near the back, voiced a common concern. This isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. How we deal with stress, how we support each other. If we don't fix that, something like this could happen again. The generals were not oblivious to these sentiments. General Matthews, in particular, emphasized the need for addressing mental health and providing better resources. Discipline alone won't solve this, she stated firmly in a briefing. We must build resilience, foster communication, and ensure no soldier feels isolated. As the day progressed, the weight of the incident and the base closure settled deeply into the fabric of military life. Families awaiting news grew anxious, while soldiers found themselves questioning the future of their service. Lieutenant Collins, despite her injury, was determined to contribute to the healing process. In a rare moment of vulnerability during a visit from a close friend, she admitted, "This incident has shaken my faith in our system. But it's also given me a chance to speak up, to push for change." Her words echoed the growing realization that the base needed more than discipline. It needed transformation. By nightfall, the generals convened once more, reviewing progress and planning next steps. Their presence had brought a temporary sense of order, but the road ahead was uncertain. General Hastings looked out over the base from his office window, the desert stars shimmering overhead. "This base has faced threats before," he said quietly to General Delgado. "But this cuts deeper. We must act decisively, or risk losing everything." The general's arrival marked a turning point, a moment when the military's highest ranks acknowledged that beneath the structured surface, the human element was fragile, vulnerable, and in need of urgent care. For the soldiers and officers, the base shutdown was more than a protocol. It was a wake-up call. The incident that had started with a violent strike on a woman's head had unleashed a storm, exposing the fault lines beneath their lives. And as the base prepared for what came next, investigations, reckonings, and reforms, everyone understood that the real battle was only beginning. The decision was made in a stark, windowless briefing room deep within the command center. The generals sat around the long steel table, their faces grave, the weight of responsibility heavy in the air. Outside, the desert sun was beginning to climb higher, casting harsh light over the base. But inside, time seemed to slow, every second thick with tension. General Robert Hastings, flanked by Generals Diane Matthews and Thomas Delgado, had just finished outlining the known facts about the violent incident that had rocked the base. Lieutenant Sarah Collins' injury was serious but stable. Private Ryan Matthews was secured and awaiting formal charges. But the surface facts told only part of the story. "This assault," Hastings said, voice low but commanding, is symptomatic of a larger breakdown: morale, discipline, mental health. The base's operations are at risk if we do not act decisively. General Matthews nodded in agreement. We have to consider the safety of every soldier here, as well as the integrity of our mission. The last thing we need is for fear and mistrust to spread unchecked. General Delgado, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, added, a partial lockdown won't suffice. We need full control to stabilize the environment, investigate thoroughly, and rebuild. The generals had debated the options for hours. Closing the base was extreme, disruptive, and carried significant consequences for operations, families, and morale. Yet it was clear that without such measures, the situation could spiral further out of control. General Hastings finally spoke, his voice steel-hard with resolve. Effective immediately, this base will be shut down. No one enters or exits without direct authorization. Operations will be suspended until further notice. We will conduct a full-scale investigation, overhaul protocols, and ensure that every soldier's safety and well-being is prioritized. There was silence around the table as the weight of this decision sank in. Outside the room, word of the shutdown spread quickly, carried by terse announcements and hurried orders. Soldiers stopped in their tracks, the suddenness of the news hitting like a physical blow. In the barracks, confusion turned to frustration and then anxiety. The shutdown meant indefinite delay of missions, restricted communication with families, and a break from routine that many soldiers depended on for stability. Corporal James Miller stood among his comrades, listening to their conversations, some angry, some fearful, others resigned. Why now? One soldier asked. Is this punishment for something we all suffer from? Miller didn't have answers, only annoying unease. He knew the shutdown wasn't just about discipline. It was a signal that leadership was grappling with something bigger, something they hadn't admitted publicly. Meanwhile, the families of soldiers stationed at the base were notified through official channels. Many gathered anxiously in nearby towns, waiting for news, rumors swirling like wildfire. Among them was Lisa Collins, Sarah's younger sister, who had just received a phone call from the military liaison. Her heart pounded as she tried to process the reality that her sister had been assaulted. And now, the entire base was under lockdown. I just want to see her, Lisa said, voice trembling. Is she going to be okay? The liaison's response was cautious but reassuring. She is stable and receiving care. We ask for your patience and trust as we work through this situation. Back on the base, the shutdown meant more than just restricted movement. It heralded an intense period of scrutiny, change, and reflection. Every soldier was subject to increased supervision, every action monitored. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing hour. Captain Bennett found himself at the epicenter of this transformation. He was tasked with managing not only the logistics of the shutdown, but also the morale of a community on edge. He held meetings with his officers, stressing the importance of unity and discipline. This is a test, he told them. How we respond now will define us, as a unit, as soldiers, and as people. We need to support each other, report concerns, and maintain professionalism. Yet beneath the surface, doubts lingered. Soldiers whispered about the fairness of the shutdown, questioned the effectiveness of leadership, and worried about the long-term implications for their careers and mental health. The shutdown also meant suspending routine training exercises, maintenance schedules, and mission preparations. For many, this felt like a loss of purpose, a pause that was difficult to bear in the high-stakes world of military service. The base's medical staff, meanwhile, faced an influx of soldiers seeking counseling, treatment, or simply someone to talk to. The incident had brought mental health issues into sharp focus, and resources were stretched thin. Dr. Allen, the base medic, found himself working around the clock. We're seeing more anxiety, depression, and symptoms of PTSD than usual, he confided to Captain Bennett. "The assault and shutdown have shaken people deeply. We need to increase support." In response, the generals ordered the immediate expansion of counseling services and mental health outreach. Support groups were established, and efforts made to break the stigma around seeking help. Lieutenant Collins, despite her injury, became an unexpected voice in these efforts. Once she was stable enough, she met with fellow officers and medical staff, sharing her story and advocating for greater awareness. "It's not just about physical wounds," she said quietly during a small meeting. "Emotional and psychological scars can be just as damaging. We need to build a culture where it's okay to ask for help." Her courage inspired many, but also highlighted the deep divide between leadership and rank-and-file soldiers. For some, her story was a rallying cry. For others, a painful reminder of vulnerabilities they feared acknowledging. As days passed, the base's usual rhythm was replaced by a heightened state of vigilance. Patrols doubled, security checkpoints were fortified, and communications were closely monitored. The generals themselves remained on site, overseeing the process and maintaining a visible presence. Their involvement sent a clear message. This was not just an administrative issue, but a crisis demanding their full attention. Outside the base gates, journalists and military analysts speculated wildly, adding to the pressure on leadership to resolve the situation quickly and transparently. Inside, soldiers grappled with the reality of their confined existence. Letters home were carefully censored. Phone calls monitored. The shutdown meant isolation, a feeling that weighed heavily on morale. Yet amid the uncertainty, small acts of resilience and solidarity began to emerge. Soldiers formed informal support groups, shared stories, and looked out for one another. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, camaraderie could be a lifeline. One evening, Corporal Miller found himself at the base chapel, sitting quietly among a handful of fellow soldiers. The incident and its aftermath had stirred a storm of emotions: fear, anger, confusion. But here, in this small sanctuary, there was a fragile sense of hope. "We've been through tough times before," a fellow soldier whispered. "We'll get through this too." Miller nodded, though he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The base shutdown was not just a response to an assault. It was a reckoning, a chance to rebuild, rethink, and heal. For Lieutenant Collins, the journey had only just begun. As she faced recovery and the public scrutiny that came with her story, she also found strength in the support of her comrades and the commitment of leadership to change. For Private Matthews, confined and isolated, the consequences of his actions loomed large. His future in the military was uncertain, his mind filled with regret and confusion. For the generals and officers in command, the shutdown was a profound challenge, one that tested their leadership, their empathy, and their resolve to protect the people they led. And for the soldiers of the base, caught in the midst of this upheaval, life had changed irrevocably. The incident, the shutdown, and the investigations had cracked open a window into the human costs of military service, costs that could no longer be ignored. As the sun set over the desert once more, the base settled into a tense stillness. The decision to shut down had been made, but the work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. And in the quiet darkness, beneath the watchful eyes of the generals, the base prepared for the long journey ahead. The days following the base shutdown were marked by an intense, almost palpable silence. The desert wind swept across the barracks and training grounds, carrying with it a sense of unease that settled over the soldiers like a heavy fog. Inside the fortified walls, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Investigators had arrived in full force. Military police officers, forensic experts, and legal advisors moved systematically through the base, interviewing personnel, reviewing surveillance footage, and gathering evidence. Their task was clear: uncover every detail that led to the assault on Lieutenant Collins and the fractures beneath the surface of the base. Captain Marcus Bennett found himself caught between two worlds, managing the day-to-day chaos of the shutdown and navigating the scrutiny that came with the investigation. Every conversation was now a potential piece of the puzzle, every action watched and recorded. In the interrogation room, Private Ryan Matthews sat alone, his expression vacant, eyes fixed on the cold metal table. The young soldier was a puzzle in himself, a man pushed to the edge, whose motives were still unclear. Lieutenant Collins had given her statement earlier, her words measured but filled with a quiet strength. She spoke of her professional relationship with Matthews, the rising tensions, and the sudden, violent blow that changed everything. "I never expected it," she said softly. "We were colleagues, working together. But something snapped." Her testimony became a cornerstone of the investigation, revealing cracks that went far beyond one incident. Outside the formal proceedings, whispers and rumors churned among the soldiers. Some questioned the fairness of the inquiry. Others feared it would lead to more division. The shutdown magnified these fears, trapping everyone in a confined space of suspicion and mistrust. Corporal James Miller, once a hopeful soldier, now felt the weight of the investigation bearing down on him. He had seen the warning signs, the late-night arguments, Matthews' withdrawal, the mounting stress, but felt powerless to intervene. In a rare moment of candid conversation with Sergeant Linda Harper, Miller admitted, "I wish I had done more. Maybe then none of this would have happened." Harper shook her head gently. "It's easy to look back and blame ourselves. But the system is flawed. We're all products of it." The flaws Harper referred to are becoming clearer with each day. The investigation uncovered reports of ignored complaints, overlooked signs of stress, and a lack of mental health resources. The culture of toughness and silence, once praised as strength, was now revealed as a dangerous barrier to healing. Meanwhile, the generals remained closely involved. General Diane Matthews, known for her strict discipline, but also her commitment to justice, pushed for transparency and accountability. "We cannot sweep this under the rug," she insisted during a briefing. "Every soldier's safety depends on our ability to confront these issues honestly." General Hastings, while equally firm, also emphasized compassion. Discipline must be balanced with understanding. We're responsible for these soldiers, their minds and bodies. As the investigation progressed, tensions within the base grew. Some soldiers felt targeted by increased scrutiny. Others resented the disruption to their lives and missions. Late one evening, a heated confrontation broke out in the barracks between two soldiers, one accusing the other of spreading rumors, the other defending his right to speak. The argument escalated, drawing the attention of officers who intervened before violence erupted. Captain Bennett, called to mediate, reminded the soldiers, "We're stronger when we stand together. Now is not the time for division." Yet beneath the surface, divisions festered. The shutdown, while necessary, had exposed fault lines that ran deep between ranks, genders, and generations. Lieutenant Collins, still recovering, became a reluctant symbol of resilience and change. Her story inspired some, but also drew criticism from those who felt the military's hardships were being unfairly scrutinized. In a quiet moment with Sergeant Harper, Collins confessed, "I never wanted this attention. I just want to serve, to help my team." Harper smiled softly. "Sometimes the hardest battles aren't on the field. You're making a difference." Meanwhile, Private Matthews faced his own demons. Confined and isolated, he struggled with guilt, fear, and confusion. His lawyers began preparing his defense, while military psychologists worked to understand his mental state. One psychologist, Dr. Naomi Ellis, described Matthews as a young man overwhelmed by circumstances, lacking the support he needed. The investigation's scope began to widen. It was no longer just about one assault, but about the culture that allowed it to happen, the pressures of military life, the stigma around vulnerability, and the urgent need for reform. Outside the base, families and communities watched anxiously. The story had captured national attention, sparking debates about military culture and mental health. For the soldiers on the base, the shutdown dragged on, stretching patience and resolve. But amid the challenges, small signs of hope emerged. New counseling programs, open dialogues, and a renewed commitment to change. As Part 5 closes, the investigation is far from over. The soldiers and leaders of the base face a pivotal moment. Will they confront the hard truths and rebuild stronger, or allow fear and division to unravel all they've fought for? The days grew heavier as the investigation continued to unfold its many layers. The base, once a place of routine and order, now felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Soldiers whispered behind closed doors, alliances shifted, and an unspoken fear permeated the barracks. Captain Marcus Bennett, burdened by the dual responsibility of maintaining discipline and managing morale, found himself stretched thin. He moved from meeting to meeting, trying to balance the demands of the generals, the needs of his soldiers, and the painful reality that the incident was far from an isolated event. One afternoon, Bennett sat in his office, staring at a thick stack of reports and testimonies. The evidence was piling up, accounts of emotional outbursts, tensions between ranks, ignored warnings, and a culture that prioritized toughness over empathy. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sergeant Linda Harper entered, her expression grave but resolute. "Captain," she said quietly, "we need to talk about what's happening with the soldiers. The tension is breaking people." Bennett sighed, gesturing for her to sit. "I know. It's like the base is cracking from the inside." Harper nodded. "I've seen more fights, more breakdowns. Some of them don't want to be here anymore." Bennett leaned back. "We have to find a way to hold them together. But the system, the way we've always done things, it's failing them." Outside his office, the soldiers were a mix of resilience and unrest. The shutdown had dragged on longer than anyone expected, stretching the limits of patience and hope. Corporal James Miller found himself caught between loyalty and doubt. He admired Lieutenant Collins' courage, but also felt the weight of the collective frustration. One evening, Miller sat with a group of soldiers around a small fire pit outside the barracks. The air was cool, and the night quiet, but the conversation was anything but. "We're supposed to be a team," one soldier said bitterly. "But it feels like we're falling apart." Miller nodded. "It's not just about one person. It's how we handle stress, how we treat each other when things get tough." Another soldier, Private Lewis, added, "I'm scared to talk about what I'm feeling. What if it makes me look weak?" Miller's gaze hardened. "That's the problem. We need to change that mindset before more people get hurt." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Sarah Collins continued her recovery. Her physical wounds were healing, but the emotional scars ran deep. She struggled with the trauma of the assault and the complicated feelings about her attacker, a man she once considered a comrade. During a therapy session with Dr. Naomi Ellis, Collins opened up about her fears. "I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again," she admitted. "But I also want to believe we can get through this, as a unit, as a family." Dr. Ellis nodded. "Healing takes time, but your willingness to speak out is a powerful step." The generals were also grappling with the fallout. General Diane Matthews was pushing for systemic changes, improved mental health services, better communication channels, and stricter oversight of leadership at all levels. General Hastings, while supportive, warned of the challenges. "We're dealing with decades of culture and tradition. Change won't come easy." General Delgado focused on discipline and accountability. "We must hold individuals responsible, but also look at the environment that allowed this to happen." The investigation's findings began to trickle out in confidential reports. Some officers faced disciplinary action for failing to address warning signs. Policies were revised to encourage reporting and provide support. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Some senior soldiers viewed the reforms as unnecessary or a sign of weakness. The divide between old-school military culture and emerging attitudes grew more pronounced. One night, tensions boiled over during a heated argument in the mess hall. Voices were raised, accusations flew, and for a moment, it seemed a fight might break out. Captain Bennett intervened swiftly, reminding everyone of the stakes. "We're here to rebuild, not tear each other apart." His words were a plea for unity, but the fractures beneath the surface remained. As the shutdown extended into weeks, families and communities continued to feel the strain. Communication restrictions meant loved ones could only wait and hope for resolution. Lisa Collins, Sarah's sister, became a quiet advocate, connecting with other families and pushing for transparency. "We need to support each other," she said during a small gathering. "Our soldiers deserve better." Back on the base, Private Ryan Matthews wrestled with guilt and confusion. Isolated and under scrutiny, he fluctuated between remorse and denial. In a rare meeting with his defense counsel, Matthews broke down. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just lost control." His lawyers prepared for what would become a landmark court-martial, a case that would draw national attention and force the military to confront uncomfortable truths. Meanwhile, the generals initiated a series of town hall meetings, open forums where soldiers could voice concerns and ask questions. The sessions were tense but necessary. During one meeting, Lieutenant Collins spoke candidly. "We all have a role in changing this culture. It starts with honesty, respect, and looking out for each other." Her words resonated, offering a glimmer of hope amid the uncertainty. As Part 6 draws to a close, the base remains suspended between chaos and order. The investigation has peeled back layers of pain and neglect, exposing the human cost of military life. But amid the fractures, there is also a determination to heal, to build a stronger, more compassionate community. The journey ahead is uncertain, fraught with challenges and difficult choices. Yet, in the hearts of those who serve, the hope for redemption and renewal burns bright. The day of the court-martial arrived with a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. The desert sun bore down mercilessly on the base. But inside the courtroom, a stark, utilitarian room repurposed for the proceedings, the temperature felt even more oppressive. Every soldier, officer, and civilian observer knew that this trial was more than just a legal battle. It was a test of the military's soul. Private Ryan Matthews sat rigid in the defendant's chair, his hands trembling slightly, eyes darting nervously. The weight of his actions and the consequences pressed on him with relentless force. Across the room, Lieutenant Sarah Collins faced him, calm but resolute, her presence a powerful symbol of both courage and pain. Captain Marcus Bennett, acting as liaison between the base leadership and the court, watched intently. The investigation's findings had laid the groundwork, but the trial would reveal the deeper complexities of what had happened and why. The courtroom filled with a mix of emotions: anticipation, anger, empathy, and fear. Soldiers who had once trained alongside Matthews and Collins sat silently, grappling with conflicting loyalties and harsh realities. The prosecution began by presenting the case: the assault on Lieutenant Collins, the prior warning signs from Matthews' behavior, and the failure of the chain of command to act decisively before the incident. Prosecutor Major Helen Graves spoke clearly and forcefully. This is a case about accountability. Private Matthews violated the trust of his comrades, shattered the sense of safety, and endangered the integrity of our military unit. As the evidence unfolded, surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and medical reports painted a stark picture. Yet beyond the facts lay deeper questions about the pressures Matthews faced, the culture that allowed his struggles to go unnoticed, and the impact on everyone involved. During cross-examination, Matthews' defense attorney sought to humanize him. Private Matthews is a young man overwhelmed by the demands of service, battling internal demons that went unaddressed. We asked the court to consider these factors. Dr. Naomi Ellis, the base psychologist, took the stand. She described Matthews' mental state, his struggles with anxiety and trauma, and the systemic failures to provide adequate support. It's clear, Dr. Ellis testified, that this is not simply a matter of individual fault. We must look at the environment and the resources, or lack thereof, that contributed to this tragedy. Lieutenant Collins also testified. She spoke with quiet strength about the assault, the pain it caused, and her hopes for change. "I want accountability," she said, "but I also want us to learn from this, to create a safer, more supportive environment for all soldiers." Her words echoed through the courtroom, touching many hearts and stirring deep reflection. Outside the courtroom, reactions were mixed. Some soldiers supported Matthews' defense, viewing him as a product of a flawed system. Others stood firmly behind Collins, demanding justice and reform. Captain Bennett found himself mediating between these perspectives, trying to hold the base together amid growing tensions. Meanwhile, the generals watched closely, aware that the trial's outcome would influence not only the fate of one soldier, but the future culture of the entire military. General Diane Matthews spoke at a press conference after the first day of proceedings. "This trial represents a turning point. We must ensure that justice is served, and that we use this moment to strengthen our commitment to the well-being of every soldier." As the trial continued, stories of other soldiers' struggles began to surface. Accounts of stress, isolation, and unaddressed mental health issues. The courtroom became a microcosm of larger systemic problems. Corporal James Miller, attending the trial as a representative of the soldiers, reflected on the journey so far. "We're seeing the consequences of silence and stigma," he said, "but also the possibility of change if we face these issues honestly." Back on the base, efforts to rebuild morale intensified. Town halls, counseling sessions, and community activities sought to bridge divides and foster healing. Lieutenant Collins, despite her ongoing recovery, took an active role in these efforts, speaking at events and encouraging open dialogue. Her determination inspired many, but also brought challenges, navigating the fine line between survivor advocacy and the need for unity. Private Matthews, isolated and under guard, prepared for the verdict with a mix of fear and acceptance. His future hung in the balance, as did the message his case would send to the military. The trial stretched into weeks, each day revealing new layers of complexity. The soldiers, leaders, and families caught in its wake grappled with the meaning of justice, accountability, and forgiveness. As Part 7 draws to a close, the courtroom drama reaches its climax, and the base stands at a crossroads between continuing the painful reckoning or returning to the old ways. The outcome will shape not only individual lives, but the very fabric of the military community. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Every eye in the room was fixed on Private Ryan Matthews, who sat stiffly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The weight of weeks of testimony, emotion, and uncertainty hung in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Outside, the desert sun beat down relentlessly, but inside, time seemed to slow to a crawl. Captain Marcus Bennett watched with a mix of dread and hope. The outcome of this trial would reverberate far beyond this room, shaping the future of the base, the lives of everyone involved, and possibly the entire military culture. He thought of Lieutenant Sarah Collins, whose bravery had become a beacon of strength for so many, and of Matthews, a young soldier whose struggles had been overlooked for too long. The judge's voice cut through the tension. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimonies, this court finds Private Ryan Matthews guilty of assaulting Lieutenant Sarah Collins. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some faces hardened in anger, others softened by sorrow. Matthews lowered his head, the reality settling in like a physical blow. The judge continued, "Sentencing will be determined at a later date, following a full review of mitigating circumstances, including mental health evaluations." The trial was over, but the journey was far from complete. Aftermath and healing. In the days that followed, the base grappled with the verdict and its implications. Matthews was transferred to a military medical facility for treatment and rehabilitation. His case had highlighted glaring deficiencies in how the military addressed mental health, stress, and the hidden wounds many soldiers carried. Lieutenant Collins, though still healing physically and emotionally, took on a new role as an advocate for change. She worked with military leaders to develop programs focused on mental health awareness, peer support, and conflict resolution. At a base-wide assembly, she addressed her fellow soldiers. "We cannot let this be a story of division and pain. It must be a story of courage, honesty, and renewal. We owe it to ourselves and to every soldier who serves." Her words inspired many, including skeptics who had long resisted change. The atmosphere on the base slowly shifted from suspicion and fear toward hope and unity. Captain Bennett spearheaded efforts to implement new training modules focused on emotional intelligence, leadership accountability, and mental wellness. The generals backed these initiatives, recognizing that true strength came from supporting the whole soldier. Families and the community. Beyond the base's walls, families and communities rallied. Lisa Collins, Sarah's sister, became a vocal supporter of military reform and mental health advocacy. She connected with families of other soldiers, creating a network of support and understanding. Community leaders and local organizations collaborated with the military to provide resources, counseling, and educational programs. The story had touched a nerve nationwide, prompting a broader conversation about the sacrifices and struggles of service members. Reflection and redemption for Private Matthews. The road ahead was uncertain. His conviction was a stark reminder of consequences, but also a catalyst for much-needed healing. In therapy sessions, he began confronting the trauma and pressures that had led to his breaking point. "It's not about excuses," he told Dr. Naomi Ellis. "It's about understanding, so this never happens again." His journey was a difficult one, marked by remorse and a desire for redemption. His case became a reference point for military psychologists and leaders, aiming to improve prevention and intervention strategies. Leadership and culture shift generals Diane Matthews Hastings and Delgado convened regularly to oversee the implementation of reforms. They knew that lasting change required more than policies. It demanded a cultural transformation. General Diane Matthews addressed the base in a powerful speech. "We must build a military where every soldier feels seen, heard, and supported, where strength includes courage to ask for help." General Hastings added, "Discipline and compassion are not opposites. They are the foundation of a resilient force." The soldiers' new reality, Corporal James Miller, Sergeant Linda Harper, and others witnessed the slow but steady transformation. Bonds were reforged, and the base began to reclaim its sense of purpose. In a quiet moment, Miller reflected, "We've been through darkness, but we're coming out stronger. It's not perfect, but it's real." Harper nodded. "This is the start of something better. For all of us." Conclusion. A story of strength and change. The story that began with a shocking act of violence evolved into a powerful narrative about accountability, compassion, and resilience. It exposed the fractures in a venerable institution, but also illuminated the path toward renewal. The base, once shut down and fractured, emerged transformed. A community committed to facing hard truths, supporting one another, and honoring the sacrifices of those who serve. Lieutenant Sarah Collins, Private Ryan Matthews, Captain Marcus Bennett, and countless others became symbols of a military learning to balance toughness with tenderness, discipline with empathy. Their story reminded the nation that true strength lies not just in arms and ranks, but in the courage to confront pain, demand justice, and embrace change.